Hey everybody, welcome to our session, Supporting Students Holistically After Trauma, Child, Refugee, Gifted Learner. My name is Katie Lewis. I'm an Associate Professor at York College, and I'm here today with my colleague, Angela Novak, who is an Associate Professor at East Carolina University. We know that 2023 has thus far been a moment of truth in the global displacement crisis. According to the UN Refugee Agency, more than 103 billion individuals and families have fled their homes due to persecution, war, political unrest, global instability, and natural disasters. The refugee journey has a goal of seeking safety, but the process can be perilous and trauma-inducing. Moreover, families may have to leave their homes due to circumstances that were psychologically stressful, both for children and for adults. While a percentage of all children under age 18 may seek for psych counseling services, more than 50% of refugee youth experience anxiety and/or post-traumatic stress. Educators, we can assist gifted refugee students by providing activities to develop relationships and reduce stress in a community-based environment. In this session, we will work in our short 30 minutes to combine a limited number of studies in giftedness and refugees' experiences, as well as look at research in gifted and trauma, in order to provide some strategies that can help educators create an inclusive and equitable learning spaces. We define educators broadly, those that are in education spaces and working to meet the affective and cognitive needs of learners. We will present exercises to use with individuals, small groups, and/or our whole classes on topics of identity and belongingness, as well as the culturally responsive strategies to use during instruction, creativity exercises that can be used for therapeutic for our students. But please note that while we strive to establish a welcoming home for our students, we also emphasize that we must take care to draw the line between educator and counselor or psychologist practitioner in this process. We are not psychologists, and though we may have backgrounds in psychology, educational psychology, or coaching, we recognize and emphasize the distinction between a licensed clinical therapist, psychologist, psychiatrist, and our place and space as educators within our classrooms, whether in K-12 or higher ed. There are several potential challenges that may impact refugees and newcomer students. And in order to establish an environment for success, educators and schools need to do things. First, we need to be aware and address potential educational gaps that may exist from systemic differences in curriculum and education requirements between the student's home country and the student's school country, as well as the additional gaps that may exist due to the span of time and transition, where there may have been limited or no access to school. Additionally, we need to be attuned to cultural, linguistic, or experiential differences that may impede progress and be accepting of those differences while addressing them. Having a sufficient staff, including the teacher leaders, multilingual leaders, counselors, special educators, gifted educators, family engagement consultants, settlement workers, social workers, and psychologists, some of which can operate as cultural brokers that can assist the educators and be resources for both the educators and our students' families. And recognizing and cognitive and affective struggles for our students, we can provide support. Support for all students through differentiated instruction, not just gifted students, but refugee students and newcomer students. When we look at this graphic on the right, some of the adjustments and challenges known to refugees. The four surrounding categories are the economic, psychosocial, environmental challenges. The cardinal directions, which act upon each of these, are basic communication, support connections, acclimatization, or getting used to and adapting to conditions and cultural adjustment. And in the center are the children's basic needs, what we think of as Maslow's basic needs: belonging, food, clothing, power, shelter, and safety. These needs that throughout the child's recent months and years may not have been met through violent experiences in their home country, family separation or loss, and so on. Even situated in a new home, there's still loss of home community, family, culture, and belonging, and a sense of control and power, and depending on the child's experiences and memories, feelings of safety. Finally, the direct center of human capacity, hope, and resilience. Stewart and Martin noted, it must be remembered that these students have already demonstrated keen skills in survival, adaptation, resiliency. Positive and useful coping skills strategies must be encouraged. Coping skills that enable survival in prior times and studies that would be culturally or practically inappropriate in the new setting must progressively give way to more developmentally and socially acceptable means of addressing the economic, social, and environmental and psychosocial challenges. It is important to remember that the maladaptive behaviors or responses to challenge that have previously been life-saving in the experience of the refugee or the newcomer. We know that refugees have triple trauma experiences. First is the pre-migration. So here in the beginning, before we leave, the age and developmental stage of migration is important. The disruption of education and separation from expanded family and peer networks. Migration also includes that separation from caregiver. It could be violence exposure or harsh living conditions exposure. The third one is post-migration experiences, stresses related to family adaptation, difficulties with education in the new language, acculturation, which includes ethnic and religious identity, sexual conflicts, intergenerational conflicts within the family, discrimination and social exclusion with peers. So as we have refugees coming, we know that there's the triple trauma, the pre-migration, the migration process itself, and then the post-migration experiences. So this, yeah.
Here we're going to listen to a student talk about her experiences in that middle area of the actual migration experience, or the mid-migration area.
Hi, come in. My name is Budur. I am 18 years old, and this is my home in Azra. We have to live Syria because of the war, so we worked transport to Jordan for looking for safety. And now let me show you my home. Now here the living room. She's my sister, and here's my mother. Hi, hello. Now this is my place, my favorite place to study, because I put all my books here. This is my collection box. And here there's chemistry, math, biology, history. I love chemistry, but this box is my special. I am studying very hard to achieve my dream. I hope to be the first Syrian woman who go to the space. And now we are going to go to my school. I have studying here for 5 years. I started studying here since I was in 8th grade, and now I am in my last year in the school. I'm so excited. I love to sit with my mother every night and talk with her. Spend all my day with her. I want to ask you a question. Why do you support my education?
أول شيء أنا بحب التعليم، والتعليم هو سلاح. لما تحصل على تعليمها أكيد هي راح تقدر ما تكون تحت ظل أي حدا يتحكم فيها. فأنا لما تحصل على تعليم عالي أكيد هي راح تقدر تملك مفاتيح العالم كله وتواجه أي تحديات إلها وتعيش مستقلة وتأخذ آرائها بنفسها يعني.
And now you will have seen the life in Azrak. It is not easy and it is not a normal life for children. Because of that, we have to keep learning because education is very important and education everything. Me and my family doing our best to survive. So now I have to go. Wish me the best and thank you for visit me. Bye bye.
So we invite you in the wonderful world of on-demand recorded video sessions to pause and go back and watch the video if you'd like. Reflect on characteristics of giftedness that you see, the things that we've talked about so far in terms of any of the migration struggles that you saw on the previous slide, as well as in terms of both anything that you heard her say from the prior experiences that she may have brought with her to the current experiences. Note that she was in the refugee camp for 5 years. She said she'd been there for 5 years of schooling, and so consider the experiences. That is a UNICEF-run camp, so sort of consider the different kinds of camps that students or children experience. And so a couple of things about trauma. One is that trauma is, in terms of a definition, it's an emotional response to an event. And there's many different events that we can consider trauma to be. And so when a lot of times when we think about trauma, we think about it in terms of event versus response. So immediately after the event, typically we might see shock, we might see denial, but after that initial event, some common responses, intense or unpredictable feelings. So it can be anxiety, nervousness, a feeling of overwhelm, a feeling of grief, irritability, mutability. Another can be changes to thoughts or behavior patterns. So a child or an adult, but we're focusing more on children, obviously, for the student aspect, but any of these are true of adults as well. So they might have a repeated or vivid memories of the event that happened. They could occur, flashbacks for no reason, or there could be a specific trigger. And these memories can actually lead to physical manifestations. They can lead to some kind of reaction like a heartbeat, sweating. It can lead to difficulty in concentration, difficulty in the ability to make a decision. The behavior patterns or the thought patterns can lead to sleep disruptions, different kinds of eating patterns. And it could go kind of in either way: oversleeping, overeating, loss of sleep, loss of appetite. So it's really just a lot of different kinds of changes. Oops, sorry, let me adjust where there we go. Got to move around where our faces are on the screen. Can also be an increase or decrease in sensitivity to environmental factors. So things that children hear or feel in terms of the outside world. So a big one is increased sensitivity to siren, any kind of loud noises, burning smells, things that can sort of immediately project students back into, particularly trauma from war, back into that time and place. Right now, we are recording this, getting close to the upcoming Independence Day holiday in the United States. And so fireworks is a big factor, and that can be really re-traumatizing or cause a lot of stress. So that re-stressing and that triggering effect for individuals that have gone through traumatic events. And so going back to that and hearing the noises and hearing the loud bangs and that kind of thing is really triggering for people who have experienced traumatic events, because it triggers and makes them feel that the event could be repeated. Another common response to a event that causes that trauma of that emotional response is strained interpersonal relationships. They can have increased conflict within the relationships. It could be withdrawn, isolated, not want to go to social activities, that kind of thing. And then any kind of physical symptom related to stress. This could be headache, nausea, chest pain, that kind of thing. And that just exacerbates the feelings of stress. And so the next thing that we hear a lot in terms of trauma, and it's great that we're hearing it a lot more lately, but at the same time, it can sometimes be overused or assumed in times when it's not being used in the best manner. And that's this idea of trauma-informed classrooms. Oh, we're trauma-informed. We're going to do this in a trauma-informed way. Well, what is that really? And so a lot of the information I'm going to present to you in this section is from Alex Vena, and she wrote a book on trauma-informed classrooms, and it's an excellent book. This in particular, and what's linked for you here, is from one of the blog posts that she's written in terms of this specific information, but her book is very good. So trauma informed is looking at how care can address the culture and practice within a community. So within a classroom, within a school. Trauma-specific services are generally clinical interventions or specific, like a counselor intervention. So, and that's one thing that Katie touched on earlier. So when we look at trauma-informed in schools, these are universal proactive shifts that we're going to use across an entire school, across an entire classroom, that are informed, and there's that word, by our understanding of trauma, by our understanding of that reaction to stress, that emotional response to an event. So we understand as a school, as a community, what trauma is all about. And so we make informed decisions based on that knowledge about our curriculum, about our environment, about how we create a community. So while we can kind of see different definitions of trauma informed out there, and how and different schools definitely do it in different ways, what it really should all be about in terms of a framework is creating safe, collaborative, and connected environments for the students and the teachers, recognizing that everyone is impacted by trauma in different ways, and that at the classroom level and at the school-wide level, we need to shift in order to meet the social, emotional, and academic needs of the students in ways that are informed, again, that word, by what we understand about trauma. At the school level, because in that definition of what trauma specific is, it specifically says clinical interventions, right? But at the school level, we often don't have that clinical piece. So what we have are some aspect of some kind of healing modality or focused modality that is designed to help someone move through trauma. So this broadens the context of trauma through a social model and incorporates different ways of or different perspectives. It incorporates some indigenous perspectives of healing and trauma as not purely a clinical or psychiatric pursuit, but as a community and a collaborative approach. And so what we look at in terms of the educational setting might be some kinds of therapy that are designed to support trauma survivors, group support, culturally specific healing practices, wraparound support, some kinds of interventions, but again, that are specifically led by someone who's qualified, an experienced individual or group, ideally a licensed clinician like the school psychologist, the school counselor, a community healer or elder, so someone within that group, that community broker that Katie talked about before. So what we can look at in schools is when we can use a trauma-specific approach embedded within, ideally within a trauma-informed classroom. And so when we can have something where students attend or are part of a pullout or a group doing an activity or extending an activity that the entire class is doing, and they just have sort of this identified group that takes it a little bit further. So it's how we can use trauma specific within that broader trauma informed approach. And so Katie is going to talk through a specific example.
Here, as we are starting, you're welcome to pause, read, and reflect, and go as slow as you would like through this. So we're going to look at a trauma-informed example with a trauma-specific integration. So thinking about an English language department, and you decided we're going to participate in the UNICEF World Poetry Day with Poems for Peace project. So on the UNICEF website, they talk about the World Poetry Day as a day to celebrate humanity's most transformed cultural and linguistic expressions of identity. Poems have long been a catalyst for dialogue of peace and for uniting people and cultures in a common humanity, shared values. UNICEF amplifies poems of children and young people in conflict-affected countries, with over 1,700 submissions coming from Ukraine alone. So in this assignment in your English language arts classroom, you could have the entire class setting it up as a trauma-informed, so everyone's benefiting from being included, and the teacher creates that safe, supportive environment. We'll get to how a little bit later on. By providing a few additional supports, the project can also become a trauma-specific project. In recognition of the challenging topic, the poetry project is part of the unit that you're doing, but the UNICEF aspect is a product creating poems for peace. So it should be optional or for just identified groups, such as your refugee students. In addition, you have asked for support from the multilingual support teacher in co-planning and co-teaching the lesson. You can ask the psychologist to take part in the discussion groups, either in class or as a pull-out, specifically for those identified students who have experienced trauma or more targeted groups like your refugees. These modifications make the add trauma-specific nature to the project. Psychotherapy for refugee students and other highly vulnerable populations can be limited because of the high cost and scarcity of our skilled trauma specialists, culturally informed and language-capable clinicians who can meet the needs of our refugee populations. Furthermore, the pharmacotherapy is limited by a sparse evidence base and parental and child preferences and costs. All these factors, again, are more prevalent in our refugee population. And overall evidence of treatment of PTSD and anxiety in refugee children is limited, and it's largely just pulled from treatment with other children with other types of trauma exposure. Moreover, in our Western strategies, such as meeting one-on-one in groups or group discussion, aren't as necessarily as specific for trauma or based on the ethnic and cultural characteristics of our youth. Music, dancing, drumming, coloring, drawing, physical activity, or strategies that actually emerge out of research conducted with refugee populations in Canada. So we're going to watch a short video clip here that will take you through a student's experience.
Привіт, татусю! Як ти там? З мамою сумуємо за тобою. Можливо, в тебе друзі? Дай нам знак, що там на фронті все під контролем. Привіт, татусю! То знову я. Твоя донька, ти ж пам'ятаєш, яка труся? Почули вибухи. Пишу цей лист сама. А мама спить, бо не спала цієї ночі. Мій тату, ти відправив нам листа? Вони отримали, що підірвали. Загинула людина. Може, 2. Наступного листа я почекаю. Мій тату, пишу я знов сама. Але тому що наша мама отримує солдат цього листа, але продовження в сльозах. Його немає. Мій батько, я сьогодні сплю у бабці. Сусідка, що мене завжди харчала. Вона дала мені цукерок і притулок, а також напоїла мене чаєм. Мій батько, пам'ятаєш, що за день? Сьогодні день народження, вже 7. Чому я не отримала листа? Давай, напиши мені щось добре. Мій батько, я почула, ніби бабця, казала щось про тебе, ніби ти вже не повернешся додому. Та чому це? Ти ж не знайшов людей, що краще, ніж ми. Але листів від тата більше не було. Бо десь в далекому, від диму темнім полі, лежить померлий, закривавлений солдат. Він є той батько, що залишив свою доню.
So Unica shares that Maria, who was 12 at this time, was forced from her her home in Odessa, Ukraine, due to the war. And she's been watching events unfold on news and wrote a poem from the perspective of a 7-year-old about to experience devastating loss. She says, I like Romania very much, says Maria, who fled in the war in Ukraine with her mother. It is a beautiful country of beautiful people, but I miss my father, my friends, and my old school. At the end, 12-year-old Maria's poem is, Dear Dad, do you remember what day it is? Today is my birthday, the 7th one. Why didn't I receive a letter? Come on, write something good. Dear Dad, I hear Grandma saying something about you, like you won't come back home anymore. But is that true? But there were no more letters from my father, because somewhere from a faraway field filled with dark smoke is lying a dead soldier. We couldn't find additional biographical information on Maria, other than she fled with her mom and misses her dad. We don't know if the events she described from the perspective of a younger child are her fears or her reality. She gives the narrator a name other than Maria and an age of her other than her own, so perhaps this child has an outcome of a deceased father, hoping beyond hope that she would have a different outcome for herself. We invite you again to pause and reflect here if you wish, or go back and rewatch the poem. We would like you to reflect on Maria's poem or the use of poetry as an educational tool to help our gifted refugee students, and resume again when you're ready.
Right, this is an infographic from the Canadian government called Refugee Mental Health and Addictions Fact Sheet for Service Providers. Within this sheet, it says that certain ethnocultural groups may use indirect expressions of distress when asked about well-being. It also mentions that they sometimes use body metaphors, and a couple of them are as follows. If there is a range of emotional symptoms or relationship problems, they may say they're tired or having a tired psyche. Fear and anxiety could be falling or crumbling of the heart, or my heart is squeezing. Helplessness or hopelessness or depression could be the world is closing in front of my face, my breath is short, or the world became dark in front of me. So these are some expressions that we might not recognize, but they mean something very personal and they mean something very specific. So on these, just giving some background information, some common things you may see or hear, some ways of responding. So on these, rather than talk through them, we just invite you to pause the presentation and read through and reflect on them on your own. And then on the next slide, I'm just going to go through really quickly because this is 6 to 12 years of age. And then on the next slide is 13 to 17 years of age. So I'm just going to flip through and give it about 3 to 5 seconds so that you have time to pause on your own and then start it again. So one of the big things that we talked about kind of briefly and said, we'll get to this a little bit later, is this idea of creating a culturally responsive, equitable community. And this is really important because one of the things that is essential both in gifted education and what we are learning and what, I'm going to move that so you can see the full quote here, and what we are learning in terms of this creating this trauma-informed, both in a trauma-informed space and in the best practices in working with refugee students and newcomer students from other countries is the importance of this culturally responsive, equitable community as well. And so these are some guiding principles from supporting newcomer and refugee students, as well as research that came about from that study that we mentioned earlier from working with refugee students in Canada. And so there's first, the guiding principles are all know starters. So knowing our students, and this is, you know, really getting to the time to knowing their personal story, their background, and keeping it in mind with both with an asset lens rather than a deficit lens. Knowing, not just knowing, but knowing and building the community. So hearing all the different perspectives that your community has and building a community, building a group of people that are there to support yourself in terms of making sure you are not pouring from an empty cup, but also supporting your students in this community, and so making sure that they have the support they need. Knowing the signs, and this is incredibly important, both knowing the signs and knowing who can help are both incredibly important. In that piece that Katie mentioned at the beginning, is knowing the line between what you can do and where you need to call for help. Because especially elementary school teachers, we often think, though I think a lot of teachers across the board feel this way, that, oh, we're everything to our students. We're the mamas, we're the psychologists, we're the organizers, we're just everything. But we do have a limit, and we need to recognize that limit, because we, especially when a student has lost mom or has lost dad or has lost this community, you know, a lot of times our heart goes out and we try, you know, sometimes to fill a void, right? Because this is, you know, teaching is a work of heart, a lot of times we say. And so, you know, we do what we can a lot of times to really support our students, but we need to draw a line, because we are not licensed clinical psychologists. We are not therapists, right? And we need to draw a line because there's a level of expertise that we don't have, and there's a level of expertise that psychologists and psychiatrists and counselors do. Need to make sure that we are knowing the signs of when we should refer, and knowing who can help in those cases. So knowing when students may be displaying hyperarousal, avoidance, withdrawal, overstimulated, knowing what they're communicating, asking them, and knowing who to go to when we think our students need some extra help. And then knowing ourselves is knowing when something may be triggering for us, knowing our own signs, knowing ourselves, knowing our own culture, and knowing what we are bringing into the classroom, and knowing when we need to limit some of that and make sure that we are being welcoming and inclusive in terms of what we are doing in the classroom. But then also knowing that our own signs of stress and distress, and how and when to look after our own mental health. So knowing yourself is really all encompassing in terms of these guiding principles. And then these four really bounce off of those, because when we know our students and our community, we need to know that we need to connect. We need to connect with children and their families, and then we need to help our students connect to other students and connect the staff to students as well. Accept is accept differences, and make sure we're fostering the culturally responsive schools, and make sure we're providing a really safe environment to learn about diversity, remembering that no one rises to low expectations. And if we have these expectations to foster diversity, then we will, our students, our fellow faculty, we will rise to them. Refer really goes back to that knowing the signs, knowing who can help, and we know that it's okay to not know what to do or to feel incapable at times. You can't be everything to everyone, and know when to refer. And the last one is emotional expression. And this is helping students learn how to express themselves in helpful and healthy ways and developing our own skills in doing the same. And that again gets back to that yourself piece in maintaining that work-life balance and expressing your own emotions in hopeful and healthy ways. And so when we get these pieces together, that is where we can go through and have a lot of different techniques to work on these different kinds of expression.
So we're going to look at some different forms of creative works that could be used in outlet of creative emotional expression within the trauma-informed classroom. So mixed media art projects are great: painting, collage, drawing, as well as musical expressions, the drumming, the singing, and dancing, creative things like poetry that we talked about before. So some things we need to keep in mind when we're providing support is first, recognize that the behavior is typically the first sign of an underlying concern. So sometimes when we don't have the words, our displaced students, their sense of home community has been shattered. And we know kids are resilient, but when dominoes fall, resiliency can be low. So we have to look at their student actions through different lens. The behavior is a form of communication. What's the kid actually saying? We also want to be sure to respect the individual and their journey, being fully aware of community of the displaced youth with whom you're educating, the significant life transitions that they're working through, personal growth and development, the new physical environment, climate, culture, new expectations both at home and school, all the transitional environment like a refugee camp. We want to begin at the beginning, teach our students about common situations that can arise and how to respond and handle those situations. And being flexible with the students is really important. Flexible in planning, approaching topics, developing relationships. We know successful teaching and learning leads to growth is based in relationships. Celebrating our grows and glows, being understanding in regards to reasons when it comes to that first point behaviors, to keeping in mind, again, the underlying concern. When I ask for assistance, we know that trauma-informed safety, that safety and trust come first, and then we have empowerment and choice. Again, think about that Maslow before the balloons focus, and like we've discussed before, this goes a really long way into terms of developing culture and safety. We want to empower our students. We want to invite the families and communities to help guide us and to show us what the students need and products that best represent their knowledge and skills. So we're going to watch a short video clip again. It's a poem. It's called The Cries of the Birds of the Sky. A 14-year-old child's written this poem. It tells a vivid story of a young boy struggling to survive because of conflict. She's dedicated her poem to the children of the international displaced persons, sharing a message that every child has a right to safety and support. So again, I'm going to play the video for you. Feel free again to pause and reflect.
Le soleil brillant tape les oiseaux du ciel. Les pleurs de détresse affaiblissent la lumière de l'arc-en-ciel. Apprêtez-vous, l'histoire est triste, triste. Ne regardez pas vos voisins, car chacun y trouve sa part de culpabilité. Éduqué par la rue, il n'a aucun avenir. Battu par la pluie, il cherche de la couverture. Rejeté par la société, il est disposé à toutes sortes de dangers. Tout juste à tes côtés, il s'y trouve. Regarde ce gamin qui, dès le bas âge, fait face à son destin. Il est là, errant dans les rues à la recherche de quoi se mettre sous la dent. Il fait face à un sort, devant lequel il ressort toujours peur. Je l'ai vu, pieds nus, avec son visage envahi par la tristesse. Il s'arrêtait de porte en porte à la recherche de tendresse. Est-ce l'effet divin ou la méchanceté des hommes? Quand je vois cet être fragile, cet être sans voix et sans espoir, pleurer à chaque seconde, ami de l'alcool, esclave de la drogue, son avenir se trouve dans les vices. Fruit de 9 mois de souffrance, il est abandonné dans la rue sans assistance. Il était là, assis devant ta porte, il souffrait faim mortel, tandis que ton fils rejetait le reste de la nourriture dans la poubelle. Dans sa promenade, il t'a tendu la main, et sans rien lui dire, tu l'as laissé partir. Il ne voulait pas grand-chose. C'était juste pour calmer sa faim. Avec une pièce de 25 francs, la journée serait bien partie. Tu as préféré boucher tes oreilles et fermer tes yeux. Au lieu de jouer le rôle d'un ange venu des cieux, lui qui est victime, innocent des violences armées, il t'a tendu la main au feu tricolore. Toi sapé comme jamais dans ta voiture de luxe, tu as ignoré sans aucun remords. Il n'est qu'un enfant qui a fui la mort. Ne lui tourne pas le dos. Il a besoin de réconfort. J'appelle nos dirigeants au dialogue de la paix pour un monde équitable où chaque enfant s'épanouit, dédié à tous les enfants des places internes.
So we invite you again to pause. You can re-listen to the video, and on this slide here, you have the text of the slide of the poem as well to reflect on.
And then our last activity here, again, has an opportunity for written journaling, storytelling, art, and this is called the Tree of Life exercise. And in our final slide, you'll have an opportunity. So anything that is underlined, obviously, is a link, and you'll have an opportunity to get a copy of the presentation so that you can follow any of these links for the specific directions. But this is the narrative therapy or Tree of Life, and this is done, has been done in classrooms, but it is also a narrative therapy, so a therapy exercise as well. So this is something that could be done in trauma informed at a larger aspect, but then for specific students a little bit closer and trauma specific. And this was originally crafted by Nazalam Dila, and this was done actually in classrooms in South Africa. And so this in the middle was the initial version and has been done several iterations since, but the idea is dividing into different sections where children draw. And so this is an example of more of a completed one where they draw or write aspects of what is going on. So in the ground, representing the present life, the roots where I come from, skills and interests on the trunk, the fruit are the gifts given to me, the leaves, important people, branches, hopes, dreams, and wishes. I've seen iterations where there's bugs crawling on the tree or on the ground that represent things. Storms here, not all of the versions include the storms, but sometimes there's storms that are challenges. And so again, different directions give different pieces. Sometimes there's flowers and seeds that are the legacies you wish to leave to others. There's a version with a compost heap that is anything that would normally go into other sections, but are now things you no longer want to be defined by. And so there's a lot of different versions depending on which one that you come across. But after it's drawn again, there's opportunities for sharing and storytelling. There's opportunities for journaling. And so there's a lot of different extensions. And that's again where we get to the trauma informed versus trauma specific, where if you're doing this in a classroom, you have someone who is qualified leading a smaller group of students, of identified students. And so that is it for us. So thank you so much for joining us. Again, if you would like, I tried to make it into a bit.ly so it's easy at least to copy down. If you would like the links, and on the I can't remember, Katie, if you said this as well, but on this slide here, all of those on the left are links to videos or examples of those different practices done in like short videos of those practices done as well. So thank you for joining us. And then Katie, I still have to shut off the video if you want to say a last few words, because it'll take me a second.
Thank you, guys. I'm glad you were able to join us.